Hi, I'm Jackie from Wacky Jackies. I'll just tell you a little bit of background about me. I have a little shop here in Bali, a quilting shop, and we run retreats for ladies from all over the world, but essentially a lot of girls come from Australia. And we do quilting retreats and textile retreats here. So one of the things I really want to talk about, and I strike a lot in the shop, is that people don't really know the basics of quilting. And I was really lucky at the age of about 35 that when I started quilting, I had an amazing teacher who was a stickler for precision. Everything had to be cut well, ironed well, and if it all is done well, it'll fit together like a puzzle. If it's not, you'll have trouble, that your corners won't meet up, your half square triangles don't work, etc., etc. So the purpose of this video is to take you back to basics. So if you do everything correctly, it's all going to fit together right. A quilt is quite precise. So we're going to take you step by step through all the essential tips, and then we'll work on our new quilt, Beginners Quilt. The very first thing that we've got to do is, when we get our lovely fabric from our stores, as you can see, this is all folded up and it's got lots of fold lines on it. It's really important to actually iron all of your fabric. Don't just put it on your desk and fold it over and cut it. That's a fatal mistake. Really, you need to iron this whole lot, and you need to iron this line here out of the middle. So we'll iron this, and I've got my little trusty little ironing board here, which is quite handy. All it is just a bit of wood with wadding on the top and a bit of fabric over the top, just easy to have it on your desk. Okay, so now you've ironed it all. You get your two selvages and get it together, put them both together and make them even, because they should be fairly straight. And then on the bottom here, you'll see if it's a little bit wonky, you just move your selvages over a little bit until you get it a nice straight. You can see there's no wonks, so there's no kind of bulges in the bottom there. Lay it down and then bring it over again here and line your selvages up with that straight line there. So that's ready for cutting. So often on patterns you'll see WOF, which means width of fabric. So width of fabric is selvage to selvage. So that is a width of fabric. Generally they're between 42 and 46, 46 inches. So yeah, you'll find the batteks are usually a little bit wider. We deal in batteks only here. So that's a width of fabric if you ever see WOF. There's very essential tools that you need for your quilting, which is a self-healing board with your grid on it. There is a 6.5 by 12.5 inch ruler. You can pretty much get by with this. And there is a rotary cutter. I particularly like these rotary cutters because when you push down to cut, the blade comes out, and as soon as you take your weight off that, it comes back in. They're fairly hard to get, but you can get them online. Now this also is good to have. These are little squares, 4.5 inch squares, 6.5 inch square for cutting back different blocks. And then we've got the 12.5 inch square. Really like that one, I use that a lot. The next bit of essential equipment you need is a 1/4 inch foot. I personally like this style. You can get them as a generic foot. Janome has them, Juki has them. And then basically your fabric would butt up against that little guide there. So a 1/4 inch seam, if you have a 1/4 inch seam, everything, and they're all perfect 1/4 inch seams, everything will slot together. It's like, once again, it's like a puzzle. If you don't have a 1/4 inch seam, and they're all different, all your points aren't going to match, your corners aren't going to match. So it's really, really essential that you have a 1/4 inch foot. A lot of people make the mistake of actually thinking that they can cut their fabric according to these grid marks here on your board. Big mistake. You can use it as a guide, like if you want, you can line up that along the bottom there, just so you know you've got a straight edge. This is the straight edge that we've just created with the ironing. And then when you want to cut it, there will be a little bit left over on the edge here because it didn't line up properly. So what we need to do is get rid of that. But what I like to do is to cut your piece first, then turn it around and get that edge straight. So using your knife, I want a 4.5-inch strip. So what you want to do is you line up the bottom edge, which is your straight edge, with the bottom of your ruler or one of the lines along your ruler to get a straight edge, and then you're going to be cutting on the grain, which is what you want. Otherwise you'll get much more fraying. So move your ruler over till you get 4.5, and the 4.5 is included with all the extra bits you're going to cut off. Line it up, hold it down firmly. You have to hold it firmly, and then very slowly cut it through. Don't take your hand off that. Pull your fabric away. You know that you have cut it. If it hasn't cut, you can go back and cut over it. Never ever roll backwards, always forwards. So that's that done. We're finished with that. We want this 4.5-inch strip of fabric. So line it up here if you want against there, but don't use these as the measuring grid. Just you're basically getting the straight along there, along the side of it. So you put this 4.5-inch along the side of it, of your strip. Hold it down nice and firm, very slowly and firmly push through. Pull that away. There's your 4.5-inch strip. Lovely and accurate. So if you ever come across in a pattern, strata cut a piece of fabric. So what it generally means is there is situations where you might have to add 2 or 3 2-inch strips or 2 or 3 3-inch strips together. So I've just got 2 by 2-inch strips and I've sewn them together with a 1/4-inch seam. So it'll say, sew those 2 pieces of width of fabric together and then strata cut 20 pieces out of it or something like that. So to strata cut it means to cut these bits, cut it across. So what you have to do is, sometimes it doesn't always, you can't always cut 20 bits straight through. So this one here would be a 2-inch because I've cut it at a 2-inch. So you line up one of your lines in the middle here with your middle seam line. And you'll always have a little bit at the end. So cut your 2 inches off and then turn it around and cut it back to 2 inches because there was a little bit of wonkiness at the end of it. So you want to get rid of that. So that's one strata cut. So it'll just go across the next one, line up the edge on the cut, line up one of the lines on your actual middle seam, hold down tight, press and cut. So that's a 2-inch strata cut. What you'll find sometimes, it starts to get a bit crooked. It seems to happen. So what I do, you just go a little bit past it. If you find that this is a bit crooked, this edge, go a bit past it, cut it, and then turn it back and cut your 2-inch strip. It just slides, the fabric slide a bit, but you want straight seams. Don't just keep cutting it on and on and on. It'll end up becoming further and further and further across. So if you find that the side seam there, the side cut there is a little bit crooked, just go a bit past, line up your center seam so you're going to get it straight, cut it, and then turn it around and cut the other half off. Then you'll have nice straight 2-inch strata pieces. A 1/4-inch seam is really important when you're actually patchworking, and what you need is the same 1/4-inch seam all the way through. So on your machine, there is actually, if you've got an electronic machine, the stitch length is usually 2.4, so you need to bring it down to 1.8. Well, I like to have it down to 1.8 because when you sew it and open it up, if it's on 2.4, you actually have too big of a hole, and 1.8 is a smaller stitch, so it's more intense and it's going to stay together. Your blocks aren't going to come apart. So I've brought that down to 1.8 and I'm going to stitch it through. So you can see that 1.8. Now, if you have a ruler, it's really a good practice when you first start. Bring your ruler over to on top of your actual work and check that your line, your seam is at 1/4 inch. It's a really good practice to do that, because otherwise you'll find you'll get through a lot of different, a lot of your work and they won't be right. It's very easy to make mistakes when you first start. So just check, do that as a check. So when you're patchworking, there's several colours that you can use, and generally I just have a look at what sort of colouring a quilt is. If there's a lot of lights, it's a good idea to use a light cotton. I use Rasant, I prefer Rasant, and you can get those at most quilting shops or haberdashery shops. But if you're sewing a really dark quilt, you don't really need a light colour, you need a dark colour. So my 4 preferred colours are white, beige, grey and black. It's really important, especially when you first start out, to pin. Like, resist the temptation of just putting it through your sewing machine, because things get uneven, they go, it goes off to the side. So it's a really good idea to pin thoroughly. That might seem a bit of an overkill, but when you're first starting out, it actually helps out. You can very gently sew over the top of the pins, or when you get to the pin with your sewing machine, pull out the pin and then keep sewing. So we're going to move on to half square triangles. In this particular pattern, there's a lot of half square triangles. I will show you one on here. There's one there. So it's 2 pieces of fabric sewn together and then cut and made into half square triangles. So the way I'll show you is, there's 2 ways actually. One, you can just draw a line through the centre of one of the pieces of fabrics you're going to use. So you've got 2 different colour fabrics. You could draw a line through the centre of that, and then using your 1/4 inch foot, sew a 1/4 inch seam either side of that line. But I absolutely love these Pauline Rogers precision tools, and this is one specifically made for half square triangles or 1/4 square triangles. So basically, you put the tool into the corner there. There's a point there, looks like an arrow. Put that into the corner there, and then the line that runs through the middle goes straight through the corner of the other side. So you line that up, and with your chalk pencil, draw a line either side of that, and then you have your 2 lines. It's probably not that noticeable, but you've got 2 lines down there, and you would put it together this is the right side together with your other one. Pin it in place because you're a beginner, and it's a good practice to do because it does slip around a little bit when you're sewing. And then you're ready to go to the sewing machine and sew down those 2 white lines. Now you're going to sew it together, the two squares together. So you just sew along those white lines. Just take it steady so that you don't go off the lines. Down one side and back the other. You don't really have to change your foot for this on the machine. And there you have your 2 lines sewn down there. We need to cut this down the middle. So you'll cut that down the middle there, and then we'll take it to the ironing board. So when you cut them down the middle, you go from corner to corner, but it's a good idea just to check, okay, those lines that you've sewn are on the 1/4 inch, and they are, which is good. And then cut directly down the middle, and you have 2 half square triangles. So we'll take those to the ironing board, and then we'll finish them off. We've got our half square triangles, and we want to iron the seam on the back. So once again, go to the dark side unless otherwise specified in your pattern. So just lie it out flat, gently, don't stretch it too much because this is cut on the bias, and cut on the bias means it has got a lot of stretch in it and can go out of shape. So I've ironed that one. I'll do the second one. Iron it to the back, just stretch it out a little bit but not too much. Turn it over. And then iron it on the front, nice and flat. Next we're going to actually trim it back to the right size. Time to trim them back. So when you actually cut a half square triangle, the original squares, they're cut slightly bigger so that you can trim them back and get a really good finish, because you have to cut those little dogs off the end there. So what you do is you line the middle seam up with your 45-degree angle on your little ruler. I'm using a little 4.5 inch ruler because it's only a 3.5 inch block that we have to cut it back to. So you line your 3.5 inch in there, check if it's, sometimes sometimes you might get a square that's quite good and you don't have to trim it back that much, but this one needs to be trimmed back all sides. So put that the 45-degree over that seam, make sure that 3.5 is in here, and then cut both sides. And then turn it around, get the 3.5 once again on here, the 45-degree angle over the seam, cut. Sometimes those little dogs don't want to come off. And then you have half square triangles. It's really important when you put a block together that you get really good corners. So these are two of those strata bits that I cut before, and what we're going to do is we're going to put it together to make a 4 square block. But to get a really nice finish and nice corners, what you need to do is you line it up. As you can see, those two seams there are interlocking, because when I ironed the seams on the back, I ironed them the same way and they will make like a little lock. But when you're a beginner, it's good to pin. So you get a pin and you pin it in to the seam about 1/2 inch down. And you have a look on the back and you see if that actually matches. So you can see the pin is actually on the seam. So when it's opened up, it creates this beautiful matching corner. So now I'm going to sew it together and show you what I mean about that nice little corner. So get to that pin, pull it out, sew it to the end. And voila. So there you can see there's a nice little corner there. And then just iron it on the back. Yes, some of it's going to be going to the light side, but then that's a nice little 4 square block. So now we want to put together this actual block to quilt, and it's called Quilt As You Go, Q-A-Y-G, Quilt As You Go. So we need 3 components. One is a 14-inch piece of your backing. So I've cut that, put that face down. Then you need a piece of the Hobbs fusible wadding. Put that over the top of that. Fusible wadding is that you can actually iron the wadding and it sticks to the fabric. So we've got the Hobbs fusible wadding. Just make sure that's nice and flat. And then your block. Face up. Centre it over the middle, because I've made that backing and wadding about 1 inch bigger than the whole actual finished block, so that you don't have to worry about that you're going to go over, you're going to run out of backing or wadding. So now you have to iron it on because it's fusible. This Hobbs fusible wadding is really good because it irons and sticks. You don't have to worry about pinning your quilt. Generally you have to pin if you haven't got fusible wadding. So give it a really good iron. You need to iron it very well so it sticks. If you haven't got Hobbs wadding, you can use normal wadding and then just use some safety pins and pin it and take the pins out as you're actually quilting. So we've done that on the back, and you want to, on the front, sorry, and you want to iron on the back. Make sure there's no creases on the back. So iron the back out. Iron it well so it sticks well with a hot iron. All right. So now that's your block. And what we want to do is we want to actually mark this out. I've just used straight lines or triangles or whatever like that because I'm not a very good quilter. I've never professed to be a quilter. I'm a patchworker. I love patchworking. I hate quilting. I usually end up getting it quilted myself. But since I've been starting this quilt as you go style of quilting, I just find it so much easier because you can get it done and not have to worry about taking it to the quilters. And I use one of these chalk pencils. And you can just either draw a line or you can use your eye. So I'm just going to draw a line straight across like that at 3/4 of an inch. Draw it again 3/4 of an inch here, and then turn it around. Draw it a 3/4 of an inch that side, and again from here. And then just do it across the quilt, because this just comes off, it just erases off this white chalk. And then you can just follow that, and it's very easy to, you're not gonna, it doesn't matter if it's not absolutely perfect, but the closer it is, the better. You'll get a nicer finish. And then from the bottom or on the outside, because there's a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, do 1 inch in from the bottom and all the sides. And then you're going to get an even square. So there's your little square in the middle, starting to form. And that's ready to go under the machine. So that's it there. You can see the little white lines on it. And now it's time to quilt it. Quilt as you go. We have it ready with all of our lines on it. This is a mono poly thread, fantastic. It's clear, so it's a lot more forgiving than using like a Rasanta, coloured Rasanta and whatnot. I always use this on the top and the bobbin, and instead of putting it on your sewing machine thread holder or your spool holder, I put it in a cup at the back and thread it up over through the machine because it seems to come off the spool a lot easier that way. So that's a good tip there. And then I've got my walking foot. Some machines have an already built-in walking foot, but this one hasn't. So this is just a generic walking foot that I've put on. So what we're going to do is we're going to now sew these 3 together and make it finish off this particular block. So all you're going to do is just start sewing. So I'm just going these straight lines all the way down. I don't bother about finishing it off. I just pull up the foot, go along the edge of the fabric because you will never see that. And then easy as that. Do one more line. So you do all the lines across it and then go to the other side and do the lines the other way. So take your block to the ironing board, give it a good iron. Now that mono poly is poly cotton, so it's not going to melt. Give it a very nice iron so it's nice and flat. And there you have your first quilted block, your 9 patch. Our next step is trimming all of our blocks back to the same size. And when I produced this one, mine all came down to 12 1/4. After you give them a really good iron and flatten them out, you should get about 12 1/4 out of it. But if you check it out, get your 12.5 inch ruler, square ruler, and put it over the top of it. And I can see sort of around both sides there's, yeah, 1/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to test these blocks. You can't make your blocks bigger. So meaning if your blocks are under 12 1/4, don't cut them at 12 1/4, cut them at 12. So if you've got a, you know, if you maybe your 1/4 inch seams are a little bit bigger than mine and they've made the block a bit smaller, well, you can't cut it that, you can just, you know, you can't cut it so it's bigger, because otherwise when you put it together, you might actually have a bit that's not into your 1/4 inch seam when you're sewing the blocks into your sashings. So just go, like I'm having a look at these, just centering it over the top of each one of them, and there's, yeah, about 1/8 of an inch on each one of them. So if I check them all, and that's the case, but if I came across one that was like, say I came across one that was under 12 1/4, well, I'm not going to cut these 12 1/4 and this 12. I'm going to cut them all 12, if you get what I mean. So all of these so far are looking pretty good. Yeah, this one's a little bit, try and stretch it out a bit, but yeah, I can get 12 1/4 out of that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cut them back to 12 1/4. And when you cut them back, you've got to cut it evenly around the outside, not just all off one side, because you might actually cut like a corner or a point off. So you've got to cut them evenly. You'll have to cut maybe 1/8 off this side and 1/8 off that side. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's all right. But as I said, once again, don't, if they're really going to be a tight 12 1/4, cut them down to 12. Yep, that's all right. All right, so I'm going to cut one down to 12 1/4. And so this is pretty much 1/8 all the way around. So that means I've got to cut 1/8 all the way around. So I'm just going to take that across to 12 1/4. Right. Turn it around and do the other side first, 12 1/4, so that you're not doing the full, you know, do it so you get your 12 1/4 this side and then work on that side. So that's 12 1/4. We'll just do a little bit. Yep. Make sure you got it straight along the bottom, so you're getting a straight edge like that. That's really important. Get your 12 1/4 here, 12 1/4 along the bottom. So you've got a nice square block. Probably actually could take a little bit more off the other side of that one. So I'm going to turn that back around and take that last little, trim that last bit off on this side. So that's your block trimmed down, ready to go. Just go through and do all your others back to 12 1/4. Or 12 if you have to, preferably 12 1/4, but 12 if you have to. And then our next thing is to be putting our sashes, putting our blocks together with our sashing. So now it's time to put all of your blocks together with your sashing. So this is the sashing here, and what we're going to do is we're going to put the rows together like that, horizontally. And once the 4 rows together, then we'll put them together vertically, so put these ones in then. So what we want to do is, as per instruction sheets, it tells you how many strips to cut, and cross cut into 12 1/4, because this width of these blocks are 12 1/4. So I've cut them at 12 1/4. If yours turn out different, cut them at that length. Then I've cut some wadding to go inside the sashing, and then this is the sasher, which is 4 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it through Pauline Rogers 2-inch sashing tool, because that's the width of the actual sashing there. So this is, I'll just show you how to do it. What I normally do is finger press it in half here, just to get the half. Then you bring the sides in to meet the middle. So you want to have it as even as you can, at least the start of it. Give it a bit of a press, then thread it up through your 2-inch sasher tool. Up and then back down. Then with your fork pin, which is a pin with two arms on it, they're quite handy. Put either side of your back seam there, stretching out your material. Just use your iron to push that 2-inch sasher tool along, and then give it a good press after you've done it. So go up to the next lot. So you'll probably be able to do around about 12 to 13 inches each time. And once you've got that all through, we can move on to the next. Sometimes it gets a little bit squished up, so just go back and iron that centre there. Give it a bit of a help along. So now I've put my 4-inch strip through my 2-inch sasher tool. So whatever size sasher tool you've got, it's double the amount, the width of fabric. So I've put that through, and I need to cut these back to 12 1/4. So I'm just doing one strip at the moment. So I'm just going to cut 2 12 1/4 inch strips to actually put this one together, put this line together. Okay, put that aside. And I've also got 2 12 1/4 inch by 2 1/2 inch strips for the back. So this is going to be your spacer strip at the back. So we've got those. What we'll do is we'll put the 2 strips. Now this wadding is, because this is a 2-inch sasher, the wadding's cut just under 2 inch, so 1 7/8. You put this inside your sashing. Give it a bit of a press to get it nice and flat, and make sure those seams are actually matching, or reaching each other, I should say, not matching. So that's 1. It just fits inside there nice and snug. Okay, doesn't matter there's that bit sitting out the end, because we'll snip that off at the end after we've put it all together. So what we've got to do first is we have to put the spacer strip on the back of the fabric. So what you've got to do is put your back side of the fabric, you put the spacer strip onto the back, like that, pin it, and this is cut at 12 1/4 by 2 1/2. So this will fit your blocks if you've got them cut down to 12 1/4. If you've kept them at 12 1/2 or 12, you need to cut the spacer strip and your sashing strip at that particular size. So I'm going to sew this on with a 1/4 inch seam. So that's block 1. I've put it on the back of block 1 and I'm going to attach it to block 2. So once again, that spacer strip gets attached to the back of block 2. Pin it. Take it to the ironing board and iron it nice and flat. So you've got it stretched out and ironed nice and flat. Okay, now you've got to add this sasher over the top of this. So you want to line up. I'm going to cut that little strip of wadding off there so it doesn't confuse it. You're going to line up the top of that, and you can see the 12 1/4 fits, and we want to get the Roxanne glue, which is amazing, basic glue, and run a strip just on the inside of the line that you've just sewn, the seam there. Make sure you've got it evenly over the 12 1/4 over the whole width of it, and then iron it. That actually sets it. The iron sets that Roxanne glue, which is amazing. It's fantastic. Then run another line on this side, and then as you're pushing it down, just stretch it out. You want to just cover that seam line that you sewed the back spacer to your block with, if you understand what I mean. Iron it down. It's nice and hot iron. Right, so now that's ready to go. I'm going to sew that on with the monopoly thread so that it's hard to see, and it's just blends in well with everything else on the top of the quilt. Using the monopoly thread, you'll just stitch either side of that stuck down sasher. Stitch very close to the edge. Try and stitch as close as you can. I mean, it's not absolutely imperative that you have it even. Just missed a bit there. And then I'm going to trim this little bit off the edge here. And as you can see, it's nice and even straight through. It's a nice straight line. That's what you want to aim for, having a nice straight line like that. So it's really important when you're going to put your borders on to actually measure the quilt in several different spots. So for example, we need to get the width of this to put your border on. So you're wanting to get the length of the border here. So measure it in several different spots. Just kind of make sure you've got the quilt stretched out nicely. So measure it from the top, along the top sword. That's 53.5. Measure it here. That's 53. That's 53. That's 53.25. So I would probably go 53. The biggest problem that people make is that they actually cut a border and then just start to sew on, and then when they get to the end, cut it off. That's not a good practice to be in, because you'll get a kind of a skew-if quilt with the border. So you really have to be very precise with your border. So with this, because you've had 2 or 3 53s, you'd cut a border of 53. So just remember that. So once you've put your 2 side borders on, and you've got them all nice and flat and ironed, then you turn your whole quilt around with your borders on, and you measure once again 3 or 4 times across the quilt, and get your, you know, if you've got 2 at 46 and 2 at 46.5 and 1 at 46.75, I'd go 46.5. So really important that you do that, because you'll end up with a nice perfect quilt. That is your binding around the outside. So I'll just neatly fold this up. And then I've told you to cut 6 by 2.5 inch strips width of fabric. And what we need to do is we need to put all these widths of fabric end to end. So you've got a really big long strip of fabric. And the correct way to do it, which I will show you the correct way to do it, is what you do is you'll be overlapping your fabric like that. So this has got to be right sides together. So fabric facing up, this fabric facing down, so it makes it right side together. You get your little ruler, or any ruler actually, put your strip through the middle down on that actual line on the edge of your fabric, right up to the corner, and then you just draw a line on a 45-degree angle. So you've got a 45-degree angle line that is going to be overlapping. So if we pin that, which I'll get a pin, if we pin that close to the line, when you fold it out, once it's sewn, it folds out like that, so you get a really nice finish. I will quickly sew that. So now you take it off, and you've got a really nice finish. And for every one of those that you do, you put it back down, get your ruler, put your quarter inch line on your seam, and trim that back. Right, so that's trimmed back. And that's the finished seam. So what we need to do is we'll add them all together, which I have done. I just need to do one more. And when you're doing them, you've got to be really careful, because remember, it's right side up and right side down. So they're right sides together. Once again, I'll show you. Get your ruler, put your 45-degree angle along that cut, draw your 45-degree angle line across there. Pin it nice and firmly so that it's all not gonna slide around. And that the sides are lining up, like the end of that strip and the side of that strip are lining up. Bring it to your machine. Start it in a little bit and then reverse back. And you get a nice finish. Just trim that off. I've done the rest of them. Then we've got one big long line of all of them stuck together. So we're going to take it over to the ironing board and give it a press. Mainly those seams you want to press, make sure that they're nice and flat, because you're going to put this through another Pauline Rogers sashing tool. So just anything that needs a bit of an iron, go over it and iron those seams to one side. Got lots of this stuff here. Lots of it. Oh no, nearly to the end. Then you've got to get your 1.5 inch sasher tool, and we're going to do it differently to what we do with the normal, like what we did with the 2 inch sasher tool. We're going to just, sorry, not 1.5, 1.25 inch sasher tool. And basically all you do is you, that over that side, make sure that you're folding it into each other with your seam on the inside, and then you just give it a little bit of an iron in half, and you just put it up through your sasher tool, and you're just basically going to iron the piece of fabric in half. So that's the difference between the two, is that you had the one piece of fabric that turned in and then you put it through the sasher tool. This one here, you're just basically turning it in half and putting it through. So that's how you make bindings. It's not necessary to have the sasher tool, just get less burnt fingers. So I'm just going to go through and do this. And I'll come back afterwards once I've done this 200 miles of binding. So we've ironed our binding. It's a 2.5 inch binding in half using our 1.25 inch Pauline Rogers sasher tool. And now I'm going to show you how to actually attach it to your quilt. Now this, to me, is the most sensible way. Not all quilters like to do this, but this to me is the easy way. You're not going to have to do any hand stitching. I don't like hand stitching unless it's actually embroidery. So what you do is you just pin a couple, pin in like from the inside to the out, so you've got your pin out there. And what we want to do is we want to create, pin it down about, I don't know, 6 inches, 6 or 8 inches. We want to create a triangle in here. So you've got a triangle there, and then you fold it over again. So you've got like a little pouch for your end of your actual, when the binding's been put all the way around, your binding will go in there and it'll be hidden. So create that little triangle by folding it over like that, and just finger press it and then fold it over again like that. So just attach it again, put your pins in down all the way around. You can go just down one side, but I'm just going to put it a little bit so I can show you how we started. So you start at the tip here on a 1/4 inch seam. So you've got your 1/4 inch foot on. I've got the mono thread on, so it's not going to show at the top. If you've got normal Rasant thread, it's going to show when it'll show through on the top. So I put the monopoly in there. You sew down over the top of there. When you get to this little pocket, just open it up a little bit, sew down probably an inch or so, pull the needle up, and then put that underneath there and start sewing. So you don't have to backstitch there or anything, just go from there. So then you go down to, we're going to sew all the way down till about 1/4 of an inch before the actual corner. Then we're going to stop. I'm not going to pin all of it. I just pinned the start of it to get it going. I'm fairly experienced, so I'm used to it, but not a bad idea to pin. Or you can get special, what they call quilt clips, and you can clip them on. Clip your binding on with that. So you're sewing it on the back of the quilt. You're putting that little triangle to start, which will hide your, it'll hide your the end of your sashing when you get to it. And I'll show you all that. And you're just sewing right to the end with the 1/4 inch seam. Just moving your quilt and repositioning things just so you can get a comfortable kind of sew. So I'm coming up to the corner. And I'm going to stop, get a pin, and I'm going to stop 1/4 inch before the end of it. So just put that pin in 1/4 inch before the end of it. So right up to that pin, and just do a little back stitch. Very gently go over, coming up to that pin. Make sure that you don't actually hit it with your needle. Go back, okay. So you've taken your work off your machine, and what you need to do to get this really nice mitered corner is you actually fold your fabric up on a 45-degree angle like that. Just finger press it a little bit. So it's 45-degree angle there, and then you fold your binding back down like that. Put a pin in there. So there's a fold is against the top of your quilt. Put a pin in there, take it over to the machine. Put a little secure stitch in there. Sew down a little bit and I'll show you how it's. So there is a little mitered corner. So when you turn it over, it'll fit really nice. You can see on the corner there it's mitered. So it's going to be a really nice finish at the front of the quilt when you've finished it. So I'm just going to finish sewing the rest of it, do the same on the corners, and when I get to the part where you have to put it in your pocket, I'll come back to you. So we've got to the last corner. I've done the mitre on that last corner, and what I'm going to do is show you how we've trimmed this to tuck it into the pocket. So I've trimmed it off just above where I started sewing on the outside. So if you remember, we sewed up here with this little triangle folded back, then we folded the triangle over and then we started sewing. So I've trimmed it just before that, and then you just simply place that inside there like that and put a pin in there. I'm going to sew that down. Little back stitch there, and then I'm going to come right down here and I'm going to sew over all those thicknesses in there. Just get it all nice and flat. And then line it up with that line of stitching from the right at the start. So that's basically, when you turn it over, it's nice and tucked into that little pocket there, and you don't have any extra seams. So now what we've got to do is we'll just iron. I'll just show you a corner part of it. We'll just iron like this, iron it from the back, and ironing out your all of your bindings, and then you have to turn it over. So turned over, it sits over the top of that sewing line that you've just created there. So I'll just show you a little on the mitered corner how you do that. So we'll start with sewing over that little tucked in corner. I'm going to change feet and make it to a flat open toe, not open toe, but a flat foot, so I haven't got the 1/4 inch seam on it. And then starting just a little bit before that tucked in pocket, making sure that your the seam under here is covered by your by your binding. You can use the little quilt clips, they're quite handy, or you can pin if you want, or you can just slowly going like I am. Do a back stitch there, you come down slowly over the top of this little pocket. Because there's quite a few thicknesses in there. Then you're going to come to the corner, which is your Midas corner. Now, sew right up to that 1/4 inch seam with it open. I usually do a back stitch here, go back a bit, and then I turn that over and create a nice little mitered corner. Mitered corner, I should say, not mitered. Carefully feed that underneath your sewing machine, and then that's how you do a corner. Do a little bit of a reverse stitch to keep it nice and firm, and just keep going along. So basically you go all the way around till you meet back up here. So this is Lily, the shop mascot. Anyway, that was the conclusion of our Back to Basics video. Don't hesitate to go back and check it at any time, because, you know, it's a good reference point if you're still learning, or you need to learn new things or refresh your ideas or your techniques. Thanks very much, and if you've got any questions, you can always contact me. Thanks.